Hi there, this is Teri from Stamping Magic. Welcome back to my channel. Today's project is this lovely card. I used the Magnolia 3D embossing folder to create it, and then I watercoloured it. I've also used some of the 6-inch Subtles paper stack for the background. So let's get started. These are all the measurements you need for the various elements required to create this project. So if you're interested in reproducing it, you can take a screenshot and refer to it later. This is the Magnolia 3D embossing folder, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the 6-inch square sized folders, and it's a thick folder, so it gives a lovely 3D effect when used. Now I'm going to use it with watercolour card today, and this isn't Stampin' Up's. I tend to buy my watercolour card in large pads or packs, and Stampin' Up's is a more creamy colour. Now the panel I've cut is 5 inches square, and this is just big enough so you can get that bottom petal in on the smaller flower and the top petal on the larger flower. And this is what it looks like once it's been run through your die cutting machine. The colours I'm using for watercolouring are Highland Heather for the petals, crushed curry for the stamens, and pear pizzazz for the leaves. I'm going to press each of these pads from the bottom, and this will transfer some of the ink into the lid, and normally you could use that then as a palette, but today I'm going to use a separate palette. I want my colours to be very pale, so I'm going to mix them separately. I'm going to be using Stampin' Up's aqua painters to colour with, but I'm going to start by just dampening my watercolour card using a normal paintbrush. Now I just want to make this damp. I don't want it to be soaking wet, and I certainly don't want the water to pool at all. So I'm just lightly covering it with water, and then I'll remove any excess with a paper towel. And then I can start watercolouring. Now I'm going to just check my colour first of all, and I've got a scrap piece of watercolour card that I'm going to test it on. And you can see how pale it is. I'm no watercolouring expert, and I've just found that with this folder in particular, the lighter the colour, the less obvious are the mistakes. So it makes sense just to go as lightly as possible. And having the card damp to start off with just helps that colour flow a bit easier and a bit more smoothly. Now you can see I'm hardly using any colour at all, and what I am putting down is just going down towards the base of each of the petals. So I'm leaving white space on the top of each. Now this petal I always struggle with colouring. I'm never quite sure how it should be done, but it looks fine in the end anyway. And that's all the petals complete. That's all I'm going to do for now. To clean your brush, you just work it gently on a kitchen towel. You can squeeze the barrel just to run some clean water through the nib, and then you're ready for your second colour. And this is going to be crushed curry. Now again, I'm going to mix it in my palette, and my first layer is going to be very light. I'll just test the shade, make it a little bit darker, and then I'm going to colour those stamens. And then I'll leave this to dry before adding some depth with some darker colour. Okay, now there is a little bit of a leaf along the bottom. Most of it's been cut off, but I just want to colour that little piece. So I just mix my green in the palette, check that it's light enough or dark enough, and then I'm going to colour the complete leaf this time, just with a light colour wash. Okay, now I can start colouring the larger flower. I'm going to dampen the petals and the stamens first of all and colour those, and then I'll dampen the leaves and colour those afterwards. Now the process is going to be exactly the same as I used for the smaller flower, so I'm going to speed this up to double time. Now you will see as you're watercolouring this embossed image that as you add more water, the fibres in the paper swell somewhat and you start to lose some of the definition of the embossing. Now the way to get that back is once you've done your first layer, if you reinsert the card into your folder, and it's quite easy to line up again, then just run it back through your die cutting machine. And when you have re-embossed it, you'll be able to see all that fine detail again, especially on the leaves and the stamens. This will make it easier to colour the second layer. I've switched my aqua painters now, so instead of the large nib, I've got the one with the medium nib. And I find this one much better for the more detailed work. So I'm going to define my leaves a bit more. And I'm going to go all around the edge of the leaves and then over all the little debossed lines. And for this I'm picking up the ink directly from the ink pad lid. I want it to be darker than the wash I put down earlier. Then I'll switch to the crushed curry again, and I want to define some of those stamens by going over them with the darker ink. Finally, I'm switching back to the Highland Heather ink, and I'm going to add some of the darker tone around the edges of each of the petals, just to add shadows where they overlap. And that's all the watercolouring complete. Now I am going to run this through the die cutting machine with the folder once more, just to make sure that all the embossing is lovely and sharp and crisp. I'm going to use my stamper artist to stamp the sentiment, and this comes from the Magnolia Blooms stamp set. I'm going to position my case under the plate, keep it level. This makes inking up the stamp much easier and cleaner. Then my watercolour card will go into the top corner, and I'll stamp this twice. Because there's a texture on the watercolour card, you rarely get a good impression first time. This will be cut out using one of the Stitched Shapes oval dies. This is the second size up. And then I have a scrap of black cardstock, and I'm going to use one of the layering oval scallop dies to die cut this, and this is the third size up. Now, because Stampin' Up no longer sell 12 by 12 basic black cardstock, I'm going to make my own card base. Now, as you can see on my original card, or maybe as you can't see, it's very difficult to see this join. So someone receiving this card would not notice it, and they would not know that it's there. You need to cut two pieces of card, one measuring 6 inches by 6 inches and the other one 6 inches by 6.5 inches, and you want to score it at 6 inches, so that will form a 1/2 inch tab on one end. If you slant cut each end of this tab, that will help make it invisible when you do join the pieces together. And then you can fold on that score line and burnish with your bone folder. Then all you need to do is add your glue and join the two pieces together. I've already layered my embossed panel onto my black mat, and you can find all the measurements at the start of this video and also on my blog. There's a direct link in the description below. I've also layered up my sentiment ready. I've got two pieces of ribbon, some of the Whisper White polka dot tulle and some of the mini striped ribbon in Gorgeous Grape. This is close enough to the Highland Heather designer series paper that I'm using for it not really to matter. So the paper comes from the 6-inch Settles stack, and I've used some of it on my original card to decorate the inside, and I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm going to use the butterfly duet punch, and I'm going to punch out the butterflies directly from the designer series paper mat that I'm going to use for my background. Now I want to stamp the bodies of the butterflies, and I'm going to use Memento Tuxedo black ink for this, and I'm using the stamps from the Butterfly Gala stamp set. Then I'll glue these to the mat that's going to go inside the card. The stamp set also has 2 sizes of antennae for the butterflies, so I'm going to stamp these as well. This mat can then be added to the inside of your card base, and I'm going to add it to the side that has that 1/2 inch tab on it, and this will help disguise that it's even there. The designer series paper can now be added to the front of the card base. And then the embossed panel can be added to the centre of this. I want to add some of our silver metallic thread behind the sentiment, and I'll attach this to the sentiment using some of our tear and tape. So I'm just going to add some strips of that to the back of that little sentiment panel. I'm also going to add another small strip to the centre of each of the ribbons. I've removed the backing strip from the tape on the sentiment, and I'm now just winding the thread around my 4 fingers, I think 4 or 5 times, just to create some loops. Then I'm going to twist them in the middle and fix them to that tear and tape. I've gone ahead and added dimensionals to this piece. I've added quite a few because it's going to be sat partly on the ribbon, so I wanted to make sure it would stick. I can now remove the backing from the tape on the grape ribbon and join it to the polka dot. And then using my sentiment panel, I can work out how long I need to make these and just trim them to the size I want. Then I can remove the backing from the tear and tape on the back of the polka dot ribbon and position this on my card. And finally, I can remove the backings from the dimensionals and position my sentiment. And that's it, we're all finished. And here's my original card. The only difference between these is that for this one I used old olive for the leaves, and I also had a narrower border. Now this one I used Grapefruit Grove. I used some of the retired Gingham Gala designer series paper for the background, and the watercolour paper I used is different here as well. This is more cream. And then this one is in Blushing Bride. And finally, although this was the first card I created, now I didn't use the ink pads for this one, I used the watercolour crayons, and I must admit I didn't like this at all once I'd finished it. But once I cut it down and made it into a card, I was quite happy with it and how it looked. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.